Photosystem 2, or P680, is the first photosystem within photosynthesis. But what is a photosystem? A photosystem is essentially the structure that is composed of a reaction center, various pigment molecules, and other complexes and other molecules we'll get into. But essentially, the purpose of a photosystem is to capture light energy, transfer that energy, and turn a bad electron donor into a good electron donor. Now, we know that within photosynthesis, we start off with an H2O, and we're going to donate those electrons all the way to the end to NADH. That's the purpose of photosynthesis. But going from H2O to NADH is an endergonic reaction. So how do we make this reaction possible? Because we know that oxygen actually has a high reduction potential. It doesn't want to give away its electrons. So how do we make oxygen give away its electrons? We create this energy event, which allows the electrons from oxygen to be departed and enter the photosynthetic pathway and eventually reach NADH. Now, how do we create that energy event? Let's say we have light coming in. Now we know light comes in as photons. So the photons are capable of exciting electrons. But how do these electrons get excited? So electron excitation is essentially an all or nothing event. What does that mean? Let's say our electron is in the ground state right over here, and in order to reach the excited state, there must be this specific amount of input of energy. This specific amount of energy must be equivalent to the energy of the photon coming in. If that energy is equivalent, so if this energy from going to ground state to excited state is equivalent to the energy of the photon coming in, the electron in one of these pigment molecules or chlorophylls can get excited, and then the energy will be transferred. But the whole point is that this is an all or nothing event. If the energy difference from ground state to excited state does not match the energy coming in of the photon, this electron cannot get excited. So let's say we have a photon come in. We have a photon come in and it gets excited. So the electron gets excited. Now that this electron, so I'll draw this out, so this electron is now in its high energy state, this electron is going to quickly drop back down to the lower energy state, its ground state. As it does so, there's a release of energy, and that energy can be transferred to a neighboring pigment molecule. And then this neighboring pigment molecule's electron will get excited. Then it will quickly drop back down to its ground state again. And then there will be a release of energy, and that energy will be transferred to another pigment molecule. And this process will keep on occurring until that energy transfer is also known as an exciton. So that's the energy transfer going from one pigment to another. When that exciton, when that energy finally reaches the reaction center, one of the electrons that is in the reaction center is going to get excited, and it's going to be passed on. When we'll see how it gets passed on, but it's going to get passed on. So to recap, these are all just pigment molecules. One of the pigment molecules gets excited by a photon, so light, and that energy is transferred to neighboring pigment molecules until that energy finally reaches the reaction center. The reaction center's electron gets excited and it gets passed on. So where does it get passed on? So let's say that this entire diagram represents photosystem 2. We just talked about the part where we have these pigment molecules which are going to get excited by a photon, so light energy, and they're going to pass these excitons, so these energy around until it reaches the reaction center. So an electron in the reaction center it will jump to its excited state, and it will be transferred onto pheophytin. So we see this electron transfer to pheophytin. That's our first electron acceptor. Then pheophytin will then pass on its electrons to PQA. PQA is known as plastoquinone. So if we recall back to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, we have quinone. Here in photosynthetic plants, we have plastoquinone. This plastoquinone is loosely bound to photosystem 2. Pardon me, it's tightly bound to photosystem 2. So PQA is tightly bound to photosystem 2. It's going to pass its electrons on to PQB. PQB, when it picks up 2 electrons, it's also going to pick up 2H+, and it's going to be released into the membrane as PQH2. So essentially, this process has to occur 2 times because plastoquinone needs 2 electrons, and then it's going to get released, and it's going to go on further to another complex. Now, the question we have to ask is, we lost an electron over here. We passed it along. How do we regenerate this electron? That's where we have the oxygen involving complex come in. So we have this complex over here. It's known as the oxygen involving complex because it's going to produce oxygen as a byproduct. And here we actually see that 2H2O, in order to fill this electron over here, 2H2O, when they get broken down into their components, we get 4H+, 4 electrons, and 1 oxygen. Those 4 electrons are capable of being transferred to the oxygen evolving complex and then onto this tyrosine. And this tyrosine is going to transfer electrons onto the reaction center because the reaction center lost the electron through this process. And that's essentially what happens at photosystem 2. It all starts with an exciton exciting one of these electrons on a pigment molecule such as chlorophyll or another pigment molecule. And that energy is transferred until it reaches the reaction center. The electron in the reaction center gets excited. That electron is passed on to pheophytin, and then the electron is passed on to PQA, then PQB. When PQB gets 2 electrons, it's going to pick up 2H+, and it's going to go into the membrane as PQH2. In order to refill that electron, we have the iron evolving complex, which is going to break down 2H2O into 4H+ and 4 electrons and oxygen. Now, this release of 4 electrons happens in a stepwise fashion. So one electron gets released and another, then another. But oxygen does not get released until all 4 electrons are lost. And also it's important to note that these 4 electrons are not going to be passed on immediately to the reaction center. They're going to be passed on one by one when they're needed. And that is essentially photosystem 2, also known as P680.